Real women.
Real talk.
Real messy.
This is Messy Midlife.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Messy Midlife. Hey, Karen.
Hi, Jen.
How are you doing?
You know, doing the thing in the new year, which for me is particularly loaded. We've got a lot of things happening in January, and then you add in a little really annoying flu potentially. That homeopathy saved my life. I cannot imagine having gone through that without a remedy. So I'm really grateful for that. But it makes all of the colorful aspects of midlife that much more complicated.
Yeah. I've had a lot on my mind lately about so many different things. And so I'm trying to narrow down so we are not just going on the tangential, wandering thoughts of Jen. Have you seen, I'm sure you've seen some of these like videos and things on social media where it's like what it's like in the brain, in the mind of a person with ADHD. And there's like a song. I talked to my husband the other day. I was like, what song's stuck in your head right now? He's like, there are no songs stuck in my head. I was like, really? You that's possible? Like, I always have at least one song playing in my brain while I'm also thinking about all of the things that I need to do and about, like, whatever existential crisis I'm having and my friend, that's going on and what book I wanna read, and then just random, "Oh, this thing needs to be done in my house." It's basically what I'm trying to say is I'm gonna try to not create that as our conversation.
Two midlife ADHDers without Aliza, the only non-ADHDer. It's a tall order, but we can try to deliver.
We'll do our best. Come along for the ride because,
I'm ready.
what
Buckle up.
there was another thing that I saw recently that it's like there's just surprise showing up or something like that. Like you just never know what you're going to get. It's surprise participation. What is it going to be? And also, you're welcome for giving you like an entire story and framework instead of just telling you the one thing. So you're welcome for the story. So come along for the ride. We both end up with you end up with some gems. I occasionally surprise myself. Frank the Tank shows up sometimes on my wanderings. But one of the things it's actually relevant to this like ADHD that I'm doing right now is these things that are showing up in midlife for so many people, ADHD being one of them, and then highly sensitive people. And I want to talk because you've got a lot of expertise with helping people who are highly sensitive people. That is, in fact, one of your primary areas of focus in your practice, both as a naturopathic doctor and as a therapist. And so I'm curious your professional opinions and your feedback and any advice and support you can provide me and any of our listeners. But I'm also curious, like how much HSP awareness becomes more prominent in midlife and perimenopause when coping strategies for all the things that we've adopted over the years just start to fail because we are just unreliable and our bodies are unreliable compared to how they had been over the years. I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about the overlap between HSP and ADHD. I'm curious about any misdiagnoses about those things. And I got some personal questions too about some of this stuff and some thoughts that I've had over the years about things with being an HSP and what sensitivity really means and all these different things. So, is that something you're willing to talk about today?
Let's get into it. The ADHD HSP overlap, I feel, could be a series of maybe 10 episodes.
It's that much.
And well, it is because it's so complicated and it's my own life and it's something that I dig into and then I'm like, but is it that or is it this? And anyway, I
Or are they
don't
just
even
the
want to.
same thing? Are they just the same thing?
What if there is? And that I do end up on that conclusion. I do come to that conclusion often. And there's just some differences that lead me back to maybe they are, and maybe they're branches within the same
All right,
umbrella.
so let's pause. I'm going to have you pause. So let's actually define from the research, from your professional experience and your personal experience. Let's pause and go back and define what a highly sensitive person is.
A highly sensitive person, in a nutshell, is someone whose nervous system processes information, stimulation, more deeply and more intensely than the average person or than a non highly sensitive person. So I use the language HSP and non HSP. And an HSP will perceive things in an environment that a non HSP will not. And what research has shown us is that about 20% of all of the species that they have researched contain this trait. So it's not a diagnosis, it is a trait that some people are born with. And I really feel called to say that it is completely independent of trauma. So they find that sunfish, 20% of a sunfish population will have this trait of higher sensitivity. And oftentimes, evolutionarily, it becomes beneficial because they become the canary in the coal mine. That means that these fish will perceive danger, they will perceive changes in patterns that lead them to be able to identify danger and therefore be able to protect their group of fish. And then they survive. And then the non-HSP fish never picked up on that. And so that obviously that translates to humans as well. And it is evolutionarily very beneficial in that regard. What that translates to for the sensitive sunfish, sensitive midlife woman, and men, it's present in men, males and females. Obviously, I work with more women generally because women tend to seek support more often than men, but I do work with men as well who are highly sensitive. The way that translates for us in midlife, especially, is that our hormones, as we've talked about so many times on our podcast, had been holding us together and making almost the impossible possible. We were extending ourselves way beyond our ability to do the things that we should be doing. So we were breaching our boundaries, and hormones were the safety net that were keeping us from crashing. And when perimenopause comes on the scene and those hormones aren't there, that safety net isn't there, it's painful for us. So sensitive people are processing more information. That means physiologically we are working harder. We're doing more things chemically in our body to process information more deeply and also perceive, right? So hearing a sound, seeing brighter colors, feeling emotions more intensely, or even feeling them at all, walking into a room and just having a sense of what the dynamic is in that room, even before you know what has happened between the people in that room, are emotions that my non HSP husband, well, I don't know if it's intense enough, you would pick up on it, but as
But
a
that's the
non
difference,
HSP,
right? Is the level of
yeah,
intensity that you have to pick up on those things. Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and I mentioned all of those different sensitivities. You don't have to have all of those different sensitivities. Somebody might be more color, light and color oriented. Another person might be more emotions. Another person might be more sound. Some of us have all of it. Yay. And so I mentioned that piece because it requires different nutrition. We have to make sure that we are replenishing our bodies with the nutrients that are utilized for the extra processing of stimulation. I like to use an analogy of baking cakes. So you start off with all of your pantry fully stocked, and that's your nutritional resource that's available to you. And every chemical reaction, every sound, every light, every emotion um, that requires a chemical reaction is like baking one cake. So a non-HSP has their one cake, right? They've got their eggs and their oil and their water and all of that. And they put their little cake, their singular cake in the oven, and the oven bakes that one cake. And then they eat their cake. That's the experience of the stimuli. And then they clean up their very small mess for their one cake. And then they're done. And that's very analogous to a physiological process. You have your nutrients that you draw from, you have the energy that it takes to create the physiological experience, the emotion or the sound or whatever. And then you have to clean, you have to detox all of that and then replenish your pantry. So for a non HSP, that process is pretty straightforward and usually doesn't require a lot of extra support. For a highly sensitive person that is perceiving things that a non HSP is not, um, we're baking so many more cakes in a day, 10, 100 more cakes. The kitchen gets really, really messy. And the detox process for us is very important. And when that's not supported, it can really wreak havoc on our quality of life. Now, enter midlife and perimenopause,
Yeah.
things get really complicated.
So what you're saying is that people who are non-HSP are the people who, like, the recommended daily allowances for things are more likely to be accurate. This is the first time in all of the years I have known you that I now understand why you always say more electrolytes for people who are highly sensitive. It just finally clicked because I was like, I don't really understand why are electrolytes so necessary? Oh, it's because your nervous system is legitimately firing more rapidly because of the sensory experience. And electrolytes are the signals for our nerves of turning on and turning off. And so if you're having more sensory experiences, you're going to use and deplete them more rapidly. Is that what the whole
Yeah.
explanation is?
That's a wonderful explanation, and magnesium being such a big player in detoxification as well is really important, and, the sensitive person's body tends to get really tight with all of that stimulation signaling that you were just describing,
Mhm.
so the relaxation of the muscles is really important for it to not become this out of control spiral. Yeah.
So I've always wondered, and this is a place that I've gotten stuck so many times, that sensitivity can have a negative connotation in some cases, especially in a more male focused, patriarchy driven place, and especially where we reward type A behavior and type A ways of navigating the world. How many women have been told, don't be so sensitive? You're too sensitive. So, is sensitivity often gets associated with just like emotions, that you're being a hyper emotional, potentially emotionally reactive person. I'm hearing you say that that can be part of it, but that's only part of it.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring that up. It's a a portion of it, and I wanna take this opportunity to describe the fact that there are sensitive people who are introverted, and
Mhm.
there are a lot of sensitive people who are also extroverted or ambiverts, where they're both.
I'm so glad you bring this up because I wrote down introvert versus extrovert because this also could sound like, are you just describing introversion compared to extroversion? So you can be a highly sensitive person on any of the introversion and extroversion spectrum.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
and there's something called a highly sensitive person who is also high sensation seeking. So, we run the gamut, and this is really important for awareness, especially at this time of life where we're kind of questioning so many different things, that just because you hear and associate sensitivity with introversion does not mean that that is the case for you. You may be someone who is very extroverted and high sensation seeking and also highly sensitive, which is what I happen to be, and also is very, very difficult to deal with because it's like break gas, break gas, break gas, break gas constantly. And it's painful. It's painful and it's really difficult to remember. Early on, it was really hard for me to remember how to take care of myself or that I even needed a different way to be taken care of because I mean, I loved going out with my friends. I love travel. I love, these new experiences, which then depletes me even further than a highly sensitive person who is also an introvert.
Yeah. It sounds almost like you are having an antagonism with yourself, like an antagonism of
Mm,
wills, as we would say in
mm,
homeopathy, that you are seeking out things that are also going to harm you in many ways and trying to find a balance in how to feed the things that feel good, but that pretty quickly turn into feeling not so good. And there's like, I wonder how much there's addiction overlap too.
Well, a lot of things came to my mind. What are you thinking about with that?
Just the constantly seeking something that feels good in the moment, but then the repercussions that you have that you
Mhm.
tend to ignore when you're starting the seeking, this feels good. I mean, it could even be something not even like right now, my hyperfixation that is, I mean, it's paint by number of all things. But my husband will, he's like gotten to the point that if I'm doing paint by number in the evening when my reserves and my resourcing, internal resourcing is depleted, if I'm doing it and it's getting, my daughter's already to bed, my husband's coming down and saying, don't stay up too late because I will lose time with it. It's like this cascading effect. So it could even be something as simple as freaking adult paint by number that just feels good. And so seeking out a thing that feels good, but then ends up overdrafting from your reserves that has the cascading effects that it goes saying.
Yes. And as you're describing this, you're talking about time blindness. And that is where I become really curious about the high sensation seeking piece because I also have been diagnosed with ADHD. So I'm really curious about that. Sensitive people who have been diagnosed with ADHD, are we the ones who are the high sensation seekers? Is that where, the Venn diagram comes together? Highly sensitive person, ADHD, high sensation seeking, the two, and how you would discern between someone with ADHD from someone who is a highly sensitive person, if they don't have the other traits, that an introverted, highly sensitive person would have. So that's fascinating.
Well, and then I think something that I don't know how far into the weeds with this that you really want to go right now, but a thing that our listeners should be aware of is that what we just mentioned, you always say somebody who's highly sensitive needs more electrolytes and that you don't go a day without making sure you've had electrolytes, right? And if you take medication for ADHD, it also depletes a lot of nutrients, including electrolytes, much more rapidly. So if somebody is a high sensation seeking person who is also a highly sensitive person, and if really what you're saying is that you're a person who has ADHD in those cases, are you going to need even greater amounts of nutritional support, especially if medication is part of what you choose to do for giving yourself the supports that you need?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
There's so much there. There's so much there. I
So,
also wanted to circle back. Go ahead.
uh-huh. No, you go ahead.
To the role of progesterone in highly sensitive people. Generally, we see that tends to drop faster than in non-HSPs because of the connection between cortisol and sensitivity. So the more we perceive information, our nervous system has to discern between safe and unsafe. And that every time, every time we eat, we have a little burst of histamine just in case that thing is going to cause anaphylaxis, just in case that thing is, threatening our lives. The same thing happens in our nervous system. Every time we ingest new stimulation, new sensory stimulation, the nervous system has to decide with a little burst of cortisol, a little burst of adrenaline to say, is this safe or not? And if it's not, we've got that pathway activated already. Because there is more data that is being processed as sensitive people, we tap into that stress response, and that adrenaline cortisol stress response is in direct competition with the progesterone pathway. It comes from the same precursor, as you know, and safety will always trump fertility,
Yeah.
right? Safety will
Safety,
always
safety
override.
trumps everything. Yeah, it gets caught up in so many different things. I talk to my patient population about this all the time too. Like we're not going to be worried about whether we can add 2 + 2 if we think that that we're going to die from anything that we happen to eat. So safety trumps everything in your body, definitely. Because like if it doesn't feel safe, your body is not going to be wanting to put yourself into a greater place of potential harm by bringing a child into the world.
And this is particularly relevant in midlife beyond fertility because progesterone is a very calming hormone. It helps to literally relax everything in the body to make space for the pregnancy. And it also is very closely related to GABA, an inhibitory neurotransmitter, a calming neurotransmitter. So I see these numbers drop very early for sensitive people. So progesterone tends to really start to decline in the early 30s, which we're hearing that perimenopause starts around 30, as early as 35. I would venture to say that highly sensitive women may experience some perimenopausal like symptoms in the early 30s, even before 35, because of the drop in progesterone, which also overlaps with fertility issues for sensitive women because of this deficiency in progesterone. That's what helps to keep the pregnancy, as you know. And when that's not there,
Right.
miscarriages happen.
Yeah. So I've talked to you about this, many times, just, personal conversations, interviewing you as an expert for my podcast for the community that I serve and everything too. So I'm curious if there's other places that we have physiological differences that people who are HSPs have compared to those who are non-HSPs. Gastrointestinal differences, urinary differences. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
is there anything else?
This is where the overlap with trauma happens. So I made a very clear point to say that your highly sensitive person trait exists independent of trauma. However, there's a lot of interplay there because if you're perceiving more information in a childhood home where maybe the parents are trying to keep things from their children, an HSP child will pick up on that very, very easily, very quickly. And then their nervous system will feel unsafe because of the attachment, how that impacts the attachment with the parents and their perception of safety. So that we know can lead to more, well, even just without bringing in the specifics of irritable bowel disease or anything like that, um, or irritable bowel syndrome and other similar illnesses, GI related, stress changes the pH in the body, in the GI tract, which impacts the microbiome. And then we start to see even just really simple things like constipation or looser stools and things like that. And then over time, that can lead to a change in even brain chemistry.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is that people who are highly sensitive can create more opportunity for dysfunction in other areas of their body, but that absent of an external stressor, that it's not necessarily going to happen. It's not like part and parcel. Like you could be a highly sensitive person who doesn't have gastrointestinal
Yes.
symptoms, but that if you are a highly sensitive person with gastrointestinal symptoms, they could be connected to each other.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What the data has found is that a highly sensitive person who has really wonderful life circumstances will actually fare better than a non-HSP. And the opposite is true. A
Okay.
highly sensitive person who has adverse life events will fare worse than a non-HSP.
Yeah.
So the terrain is important in life, the environment for the child growing up, as well as microbiome.
All right, so I got so many more questions. I'm sorry, I'm just like hammering you with questions today. That's what you get for knowing what you're talking about with this stuff. So you said that perimenopause can actually start to present earlier for people who are highly sensitive just because of the way that their body is working and that the interplay between our stress and anxiety related hormones. But it's cortisol is not just that. It's also what wakes us up in the morning. It's our wakefulness hormone. It's our alertness hormone is what we should call it really. And it's just because we need to be alert when we're dealing with stress, we now associate it with stress. But cortisol is not all bad. It is what wakes us up in the morning. It is a normal part of our physiological function and our hormone balance. We need to have cortisol. And so, because of this interplay, this really delicate interplay, and the greater likelihood to potentially perceive things that become more stressful, that we can start to see signs of perimenopause earlier, but it's not necessarily actually perimenopause. Is that right? It just feels
Right.
like it? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So sleep disturbances would be related to progesterone
That
starting
was
to
on my
drop.
list, the sleep stuff. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I see happen first for sensitive people, even though generally for the entire female population, we know that testosterone is typically the first hormone to drop in perimenopause, and it starts in the mid-30s. Progesterone follows very quickly after that, but with sensitive women, I'm finding that progesterone drops first. So maybe there's sleep disruption, more irritability because again, the inhibitory neurotransmitter of GABA and the soothing effects of progesterone are not as prevalent because those two are in lower concentrations for sensitive people for that reason. And periods can start to shift a little bit. So we might see um, we might see longer bleeding, right? So the dark spots at the beginning of the bleeding, and then it turns into a full period, and then it fizzles out again into the darker blood. Darker blood is a pretty typical presentation of lower progesterone, and it also causes this longer cycle. Estrogen has a role in that as well, but since we're talking about hormones, estrogen is like what everybody talks about with perimenopause. It's actually the last player. Like when you're starting to have really erratic periods or missing periods, hot flashes, things like that, that's more related to estrogen. Sleep disturbances, irritability, changes in your cycle, but they're still regular, are going to be more progesterone, where testosterone is going to be a lot more physical symptoms, confidence, and desire for passion and things like that. And libido can be affected by testosterone and estrogen both. But if progesterone drops a lot, that can also affect libido. Everything affects libido. So yeah, that's a little very brief explanation of the hormones and what they do. But we do see that progesterone is more of a player earlier on because of the overlap with, I don't want to say hypervigilance, but that's kind of the state that a lot of sensitive people end up being in, especially because I don't know about other people my age. Nobody taught me about how to take care of my nervous system as a sensitive person. I was told I was
Yeah.
sensitive a lot, not in
Yeah.
a really pleasant or positive way, but okay. I remember thinking, I was really young. I remember thinking, and what do I do about it? Like, what if I suppose this is just my package?
Just
This is
stop.
who I am. Yeah.
Just stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, that leads into another really important and probably a bit vulnerable part of the stuff, which is the conversation that I've asked you a couple of times, but I've never maybe been really fully prepared to go down it because it's usually like mention it in a text, not in a conversation where we're actually going to talk about it. So I am curious about suppression of sensitivity and if that's a possibility and what that looks like.
Yeah. That's a big question because I think most of us as sensitive people have experienced that to some extent. I know I did. It was really unfavorable for me. Specifically for you, there are different types of sensitive people. I'm curious about the warrior gene component, also considering the fact that you were literally a soldier, a warrior, and the training that played in your life. Can you speak a little bit to the warrior gene piece? I think there's going to be a lot of people that are interested in that. And I think it plays well into what your question is, which is the suppression
Oh,
piece.
really? That's interesting. Well, let me back up just a little bit. So the reason I'm asking this for anybody, I'm just going to put it all together. You and I know each other well enough that I think you're like reading my mind, and it's not fair to anybody who's listening who might relate to what my question is. So my question about suppression is related to the fact that I have been told by people in many different settings and many different circumstances that I'm a sensitive person. And so I've been told this from therapists, meaning that I pick up on what another person is experiencing very, very quickly without much detail being presented to me, or maybe any detail, but I can really pick up on what's happening in a situation, what's going on with a person. I've been told I'm very intuitive, which that's a whole different conversation that I think we need to have maybe next time we talk about like overlaps of things with like intuition and midlife and suppression and like dieting and all of the ways that we can impact our intuition, whether it's a highly sensitive situation or not, because we all have some amount of intuition, right? But I've had a lot of people tell me a lot of things about me that I don't necessarily connect with. And I don't know how much of that is resistance or suppression or people trying to make me something that I'm not. And I say all this because I don't feel like I'm the most sensitive person. I really don't feel like I am. And maybe it's just because I've got a negative connotation of the word sensitive because I served in the military because yeah, I pick up on all the things that are happening around me for the most part. I get too much sensory input from things. And for some reason it's easier to recognize it as ADHD instead of being highly sensitive, even though it really is starting to feel like it's the same thing. I also have the opposite situation. I've had a bunch of people say, you suppress the heck out of everything. Like, I don't feel pain until it's really bad. I feel like nothing until then I feel everything. And to the point that I have started when I go to a doctor because I've had so much more pain showing up recently. I'm curious if there's a connection with that too in your mind. I have to have my pain scale out because I chronically underreport and I don't connect with it or I don't experience it. So I'm curious about this possibility of suppression, disembodiment from any of the things we could talk about with disordered eating and all of the ways that I have just learned to not listen to myself and listen to my body. I'm dancing around all of these things. I guess I'm really wanting to know, can you be a highly sensitive person but not recognize that you're a highly sensitive person, or do you just know if you
Oh
are?
gosh, no. No, I think most people don't because sensitivity is not perceived, even though it's highly valued, right? Everybody wants the highly sensitive person to listen to them, to be empathetic of them, to anticipate their needs. To have a sensitive person in your group, people really appreciate that. Or in a professional setting, there's a high desire for the attention to detail, the ability to maneuver the nuances that other people don't perceive. But they want the quality, but they also want the quantity, right? In a capitalist society, that's where the quantity piece, that's where the sensitivity is deemed as not being of value, and becoming a derogatory term. So back to your question, like, do people exist that are highly sensitive and have no idea? Almost everybody that I work with has been that way. There's maybe, I don't know, 2-3% of people that come in and are like, I've always known I'm a highly sensitive person. And now there's data that really helps me to
Yeah.
validate my experience. But most people do not. And here's the piece you were talking about: embodiment and lack thereof. Highly sensitive people who are told that sensitivity is bad or wrong, is used as a derogatory term in any way, will learn to move from our bodies. I'm going to say ours because I definitely did this, from our bodies into our mind. And I know I'm biased because I work with sensitive people, but I really do think we're very bright and special. And when we retreat into our minds out of our bodies, because the body is so loud with all of that extra sensory information that's coming in, and we're being told that we shouldn't be perceiving all of that because it's negative and it's bad and it's making us less productive, that's where most sensitive people end up, is up here. And it is a form of dissociation from the body. And intuition is really something that is experienced in a full embodiment.
Karen, I spend the last 2.5 years with my therapist, with her telling me, what does it feel like? What does it feel like in your body? What is the emotion you're having? Because you just go to thinking and you're trying to explain it and you're trying to find a solution and you're trying to navigate it using your brain. And what are you feeling? I'm recognizing that I don't have the best reaction when I hear somebody say that they're a highly sensitive person. You are the first person who identifies that way and who claims it, that I did not, that I didn't
Recoil?
take it. Yeah, that I didn't recoil or have uncharitable thought that I had to then think my way out of. Maybe not even an uncharitable thought, that maybe it was actually a feeling that I then thought my way out of and recognized that it wasn't okay and moved through it. My knee jerk reaction is, being a highly sensitive person, are you just using it as an excuse so you just don't have to do the hard things? And I don't know. I don't know that I will ever identify as a highly sensitive person, no matter how many people might try to say that I am a highly sensitive person. And to go back to your question about the warrior gene and my time in the military, I mean, yeah, of course, in the military, you don't spend time in your emotions. You don't spend time talking about how you feel about stuff, and especially the time that I served in the military, which was the late 1900s and early 2000s. um, and it's a formative time of my life, but I think that something started before then that led me to seek that out to prove something, perhaps even. And I don't know, like the warrior gene, that has nothing to do with having been in the military. And did it make it more possible for me to be successful with the sleep deprivation and intensity required to make it through boot camp and to make it through, any potential deployments? I didn't have like a hard job. I mean, I had a mentally challenging job and sometimes, but I was like, I worked in Intel. I wasn't doing stuff on the front lines of anything. When I was on the front lines, it was like way behind the front lines. Nobody was carrying guns around me, you know? Um, and I was sitting behind a computer in a secure, you know, facility. So anyway, what was your question specifically about the warrior genes?
I mean, there's so much that I think you could get into the nerdy aspects of it, which of course I'm always here for. But given that we don't have that much time today,
That's
I
right.
think you nailed it. It made you more susceptible to being able to separate from your somatic experience, to push even further beyond your limits.
Okay, well, we're not even close to being done tackling this, so we're probably gonna need to come back to it next week and talk about all of the things that overlap and how highly sensitive people fare differently and have different needs through midlife and perimenopause because we're not even really at that yet. We tackled a little bit about the potential early presentation, but I still want to know all the stuff that you know about what perimenopause looks like for people who are highly sensitive, how even just the experience of shifting through things when we get to that place that we can no longer really ignore who we are. That really seems to come up and it just punches us in the face with perimenopause and midlife and all of the things. So, if it's okay, I want to keep talking to you about this next week and I will get some time to think about it and to be a little bit more, I don't know, pummel you with more questions, honestly, probably.
I'd really like to pick up, maybe we can call this the next one, our part 2 on this, on what happens when a sensitive person, and even generally in midlife, what happens when women are able to embody their experience, our experience. It's particularly relevant for sensitive people because there is this ability to perceive information that is different than non-HSPs. But I do think that that is a really important topic in perimenopause, in midlife for women. What happens when we are able to fully inhabit our bodies and be present in the way that we were not able to do before because hormones were running the show? They allowed us to fit into a really nicely prepackaged societal expectation. And now that that is no longer, we have to come back to ourselves. And I suspect that there's some pretty magical and wonderful things that happen when we are able to do that. So I love where we're leaving off and where we can pick up around the embodiment piece with sensitivity, with perimenopause and midlife for women who may or may not be highly sensitive.
And I'm just gonna like tell you, I think we do need to revisit and discuss a little bit more the suppression of the sensitivity and what that ultimately can look like. So, because I'm sure it's different if you are living and existing and accepting a highly sensitive state as you move into midlife versus suppressing a highly sensitive state and moving into midlife. And there's probably a lot of big differences in how that could present and what it could even look like. And I'm curious if either of those things even changes the types of things we need to do to care for ourselves during this time. So, I'm going to give you some time to think about it so you can give me all the advice if I'm willing to grudgingly or lovingly lean into this possibility that maybe perhaps I have some high sensitivity. Maybe.
Some high sensitivity. I think that's the next piece to explore because, like I said, we run the gamut.
Yeah.
Sensitive people, we're all on a huge spectrum of, we can get into this next time, but the spectrum is very, very broad, and there are a lot of different colors of presentation of sensitivity. Maybe that can help your brain to consider the possibility.
I'm also curious what sort of things people might see if they have been suppressing sensitivity, because if, as you're saying, if it's not so much just about you being an emotional person necessarily, but just about feeling and experiencing things from your environment, external and internal, intensely and deeply, and with like an early alert system, if you will. I'm curious what suppression might present as if you're not allowing that, what it could actually look like instead.
Yeah, and how
And it's
relevant
and the
that is.
answer better not be endometriosis. Though
Noted.
perhaps, but you, if it is that, you can still say it, but all right, Karen. Well, thank you for doing the whole education place. Like, I hate when we're having our conversation that we're here as friends and I put you and Eliza, but I'm going to do it to Eliza too, because I feel like we all need I need a refresher, and some people who don't have the medical training need just like the basics. Wait a minute, what are all these hormones that you're talking about? And it's like, it's a spider web that gets confusing, even if you have a lot of training and understanding of the way things all work, because you tug on one piece of it and everything moves. And when you get into perimenopause, it starts to look like those pictures of spiders making webs when they're on various different drugs, right? And so it gets even more confusing, and the tugging gets a little bit even more complicated. So when Eliza is able to rejoin us, I'm going to make you guys talk about that too, because if I feel a little bit overwhelmed, I'm sure our listeners sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed too. And I say all this to say I appreciate when you guys are willing to go into that place and put your doctor hat on while we're having a friend conversation.
I was just thinking that what a blessing it is to have friends who can put their doctor hats on when we're in need of that extra support and understanding, which we do for each other all the time, as evidenced today, because midlife is a box of chocolates, and each of us has a different medical hat that we can apply to each of those different chocolates. So I am honored to do that with you, and I'm grateful that you get to do that with me sometimes
Yeah.
as well.
All right. Well, to
All
be
right.
continued, because we definitely have
Stay
more that we
tuned.
need to talk to each other about this whole topic, and some thoughts that I need to dissect and come back and discuss with you next week. So to be continued.
To be
All right.
continued. All
All
right.
right. Love
Love you
you.
so much. Bye.
Bye.
If our messy is your kind of messy, we'd love for you to rate, review, and follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
We'd also love to know what's on your mind. If you were to join us, what would we be talking about? Email us at messymidlifepodcast@gmail.com or message us on Instagram or TikTok.